Welcome to the AFR Saints channel, where we provide you daily content on your favorite team, the New Orleans Saints. Do us a favor and hit that subscribe button. Be sure to leave your comments below and smash that like button. Who dat? The gigantic story this offseason around the New Orleans Saints, of course, is what is going to happen with former Saints coach Sean Payton. Love the insight of former Saints GM Randy Mueller, who spent essentially his entire adult professional life in front offices around football and currently is the director of player personnel with the Seattle Sea Dragons of the XFL. Does podcasts for The Athletic as well, and Randy's good enough to join us here. Randy, we always appreciate a few minutes, man. Thank you. How are you?
I'm doing great. Good to be back with you.
Thanks, Randy. We appreciate it, man. If I ask you outside looking in, as you've watched the Sean Payton sweepstakes unfold here over these last several weeks, do you have any overarching observations of how this has all played out?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I'm trying to view it with an open mind. We heard Sean's version of the lay of the land the other day on TV, and I'm not sure that coincides with Mickey Loomis's version, but okay. I understand Sean wants to get his narrative out there, so I get it. I think at the end of the day, obviously Mickey has to do what's right for the Saints, and so that may not be exactly what Sean wants. And I don't think Mickey can be swayed by that, by any public sentiment of any kind, or any desire of Sean. His loyalty is to the Saints, so he's got to get the best deal he can, and I think that would lead us to Sean probably going outside the division for sure. So I'm not sure what all the Carolina stuff is really to be. I just don't see that happening. So there's a couple different things. Obviously, Sean has made it clear of his stance and where he thinks things are. We'll see if time will tell if that's actually the truth.
So I think it's a pretty fascinating point you brought up, because I've been wondering this. Whose decision ultimately is it, Randy? Does Sean Payton pick a team and then Mickey Loomis negotiates, or does the team negotiate a deal with the Saints, and ultimately Loomis gets to pick where Payton goes?
Well, I'm not sure how it's going to go down, but I do know this. Mickey has a lot of respect for Sean. I know that he thinks that Sean deserves to go kind of where he wants to go. But Mickey's got to be careful in that he's the keeper of the Saints. So my question is, I know we've seen all these teams reach out to get permission to talk to him. I think the price is going to be different depending on who the team is. So I guess it comes back at some point to a team saying, hey, we want to hire Sean. He wants to be with us. Now let's try to figure out a way to make it happen. And maybe at that point, Mickey can give a little wink to Sean on the side and say, hey, you're going to get there. But if I'm Sean Payton and I pick a place that I'm deciding to go and they want me, I don't want the asking price to be a whole bunch, because that team is using a tool to better our team.
Right.
So he's kind of stuck between a rock and a hard spot. His ego might say, hey, I'm worth 2 first-round picks, when at the end of the day, I don't want him to give anything for me. So that's why I think Mickey's got to decide what he wants.
So there's two different questions about compensation. One is compensation for Sean Payton. We've seen the reports out there. The Miami report a year ago was that they were willing to pay $100 million over 4 or 5 years, which would put the tag at $20 to $25 million per for Sean Payton. We know head coaching salaries don't have to be made public. Randy, is that even realistic?
It would be the highest I've ever heard of, I'll be honest with you. I don't think that is a real possibility. I think Sean or his team would love to have that out there for sure. I think that's going to scare away 90% of the teams. And I've said from day one, when all of this came up, there's 3 things, right? There's compensation to the Saints, there's compensation to Sean, and then there's a front office structure that Sean is comfortable with. That eliminates, I'm telling you, about 28 of the teams, because teams aren't going to do that. So maybe they have a new owner in Denver that's willing to acquiesce to all those demands, but most of the owners in the NFL will not be willing to do that.
What about Randy Mueller is our guest. He's on Twitter at Randy Mueller _. Y'all give him a follow. What about the Saints compensation, Randy? If you were on that side of the table, what does that look like?
Well, I think whatever you're willing to settle with, you've got to ask for more than that, because there will be some negotiations. And I've heard Sean's version is that it's a mid to late round first, and that may be what it is. If it is, I'm asking for a lot more than that, and we're going to settle on something in between. So I don't know what Mickey's going to do. Obviously, he's a good friend of mine, but we have not talked about any of these details. My guess is he'll ask for at least a first and then some other compensation as well. But again, it depends on where that first-round pick is, and from within what other chips that team has to put on the table. For example, I don't think he will ever negotiate with Carolina. To me, that's suicide. You're putting them in the same division. It makes no sense. I don't care what they're willing to pay. So maybe they use that as a bargaining chip, they as in the Saints, to get more from somebody else. I don't know.
What if Carolina is willing to give you what you want and give you that first-round draft pick? Maybe it's next year's first-round draft pick.
Well, I think he'll do better than that somewhere else. Again, I would anticipate the Saints stretching out the compensation that they'll get for Sean Payton. I think it's a true value. I noticed that Sean mentioned this in his interview the other day, that if it's next year, it's going to change. I took that as a shot over the bow to the Saints. In other words, maybe it'll be less next year. I don't see that being a threat to the Saints having to acquiesce to taking a lesser deal just because it's going to be a lot less 2 years from now. I don't see that being the case.
Randy, is Sean Payton worth it as a GM? Do you think he's worth it?
Well, I like Sean. I know a lot about him, obviously, because my people are all still in and around the States. I would not do that, and I don't think a lot of owners would either. I just think it is great to have a coach. I want him to coach. I don't want another general manager. I don't want anybody pulling strings behind the scenes, but that's my personal opinion. I do know that Sean says he's willing to work with whoever. I just know the personality, and I don't know how that's going to go. He had an ideal situation in New Orleans because, as we know, Mickey came up in the salary cap side, so he gives Sean a lot of rope on the football side. These other places that we're talking about have GMs who are football people. George Payton in Denver, Scott Fitterer in Charlotte. These guys have legitimate football careers and resumes in building teams. So I don't know how much input Sean's going to necessarily acquire when he takes one of these gigs. So it's going to be one where he's going to have shared authority, in my opinion, and be a partner. And that kind of makes me nervous, to be honest with you.
Do you have a guess, a feel on how this all ultimately resolves itself and where Sean Payton ends up next year, assuming that he is coaching next year?
If I was a betting man, and I don't have any inside knowledge, let me just say that.
Sure.
I think the Denver situation might make the most sense. George Payton, I know he worked for me in Miami, a good man and willing to set aside his own ego. I think he would move to the side and allow Sean to have bells and whistles and authority and all that. Plus, you've got a new ownership group that really wants to make a splash and have a positive effect on what was a miserable, bad season. The other thing is, and you probably remember this, when Russell Wilson was leaving Seattle, he made a list of 4 or 5 teams he was willing to be traded to. The Saints were on that list. And they were on that list for a reason. It's because Sean Payton was the head coach. So there has to be some connection there at some point. At least there's admiration and respect. So I don't think that the fact that Russell Wilson was so bad this year eliminates everybody from wanting to take that job.
We remember it well. Talked about it a lot here, that Russell Wilson situation. Hey, Randy, one more before you go. If I could ask you a question about the Saints, and I mean, obviously you're not inside the organization any longer, but they seem to be taking an approach that is contrary to what many teams in the NFL do today, which is they're being patient. They're retaining Dennis Allen. They're apparently retaining Pete Carmichael as well. Do you think, outside of looking in, that the Saints need more of a shakeup than what apparently is coming this offseason?
I don't know about that. I think they've had a lot of success. They think they have a really good track record. Knowing Mickey as well as I do, I mean, he's a brother of mine forever. I know he's going to be patient. I know it's going to be process-oriented, all their decisions. And I don't think they're going to be swayed by one mediocre year or less than mediocre year, depending on how you look at it. I just know the way they operate. So it doesn't surprise me that they've made very few changes. At some point, maybe you see different eyes come in the front office because it's been the same plan forever. And sometimes I always used to like to have an independent set of eyes evaluate my teams, even when I was the GM, to keep me honest. Maybe that happens. I have no clue. But I know this, they're not going to make knee-jerk reactions based on what fans might think in the short term.
He is Randy Mueller. It is always insightful when you get a chance to talk to a guy that's been an NFL general manager and has 40 years experience in pro football. I didn't mean to sell you short a decade there, Randy. Make sure
I've earned this gray hair, I'll tell you that.
He's on. Well, I have no hair, so at least you're doing better than me. He's on Twitter at @RandyMueller_. Y'all give him a follow. Randy, we always appreciate a couple of minutes, man. Thank you so much.
You bet. Take care.
Hey, thanks so much for watching. Please leave your comments. I love to interact. And be sure to hit the red subscribe button below.